Hey, welcome everyone to our studies of Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz and his approach to the Parsha. This week's Parsha is Parshas Korach, and of course it is dominated by the personality and the direction of Korach. And I'd like to share with you some fascinating and always original insights into the main theme, which says, as I said, is Korach. So the parsha begins with the words Vayikach Korach, just to orient everyone. So we're in Bamidbar, Perek Zayin, chapter 16 in Bamidbar in Numbers. Vayikach, can I just ask whoever's microphone is on, if you could just go to mute, it would be best for all of us. Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kahas ben Levi v'dasan v'avim b'nei Eliyav v'on ben Peles b'nei Ruven. Korach, who is traced back a few generations, together with some of his co-conspirators, they took something, but the Torah doesn't actually say what they took. So we'll soon turn to that. But by way of context, he asked, Rabbi Eibeschutz asked, why did Korach wait until now? Why was this the moment critique for him to launch his insurrection? It's very possible that it was on his mind for some time. We are already, in terms of the sequence of the Torah, we've done, after Matan Torah, we've done already Shmos, we've done Vayikra, we're halfway through Bamidbar. What is the significance of the timing? So the simple answer would be, I think we can all agree, and some of the Parashim say this, excuse me, that after last week's Parsha, which of course was dominated by the sin of the Meraglim, the catastrophe of the spies, Moshe's prestige and his credibility and his popularity were all at a low ebb. He had done well initially, took them out of Egypt, crossed the sea, gave the Torah to them at Har Sinai. Okay, there was the not insignificant matter of the Chet HaEgel, but that was not really his fault. He managed to win reconciliation with the Almighty. They built the Mishkan. They now have set out on the journey, and they're on their way to the land of Israel. They dispatched the spies, which again was not Moshe's idea necessarily, but nevertheless, it all ended in tears. And therefore his promise that I will take you from slavery and bring you to a land of milk and honey was not realized. On the contrary, they had now been condemned to wander in the wilderness for a total of 40 years. The entire generation was destined to die. So Moshe's, as I said, credibility, etc., took a terrible hit. And Korach may have seen this as an opportunity for his great power play. Because when Moshe is riding high, what possibility does he or anyone else have to unseat Moshe, to supplant Moshe? But now that the Chet HaMeraglim has happened, so this, I would say, is the conventional explanation. Rabbi Eibeschutz goes further, though. He mentions a medrash which has an echo in a few different places. But the first indication of the fact that Moshe is not going to succeed in bringing the Jewish people into the land of Israel himself, the first indication is when Moshe is talking to Hashem in Mitzrayim after the initial attempt to persuade or instruct Paro to release the Jewish people has ended in grief. And Hashem says to Moshe, Atatir, and now you will see. In other words, now you will see how I'm going to begin to demonstrate my mastery of the world. I'm going to begin to humble Paro and the Egyptians. Atatir, and now you will see. Hang tight, Hashem says to Moshe. Atatir. Atatir means now you will see. Says the Medrash, Moshe, you will see now the downfall of Paro, but you won't see the downfall, a total of 31 kings. They must have been like chieftains or warlords in Canaan. The various tribes had a total of 31, as I said, chieftains, and they would all bite the dust when Joshua would bring the Jewish people into the land of Canaan. Although actually some of them lived on to menace the Jewish people for a long time afterwards. But in any case, the battle to conquer Canaan, Moshe will not see. The Medrash says that already at that early stage, because of Moshe's questioning the wisdom or the propriety of the mission upon which Hashem had sent him. As a result, the Torah, the Medrash says that Moshe, you will see now the downfall of Paro, but you will not see the war against the Malachim. In other words, my point is, according to the Medrash, it was already anticipated that Moshe will not actually bring the Jewish people into the land of Israel. Excuse me. So according to that, says Yonatan Eibeschutz, it makes very good sense why Korach only waited till now to mount his insurrection. Because according to the original plan, that the Jewish people are going to march into the land of Israel right away, it's only 11 days journey. It says in the beginning of Dvarim, it's only 11 days journey, Derech Har Seir, from Horeb, from Mount Sinai to the border of the land of Israel. There's only 11 days journey. If that's, and Moshe is not going to bring them into the land of Israel because of the original prophecy. If that's the case, Korach's point of view was Moshe in any case is going to be deposed in 11 days. According to the original plan, Moshe's role as the king and everything else would only last until they get to the land of Israel, because then it had already been predicted that Moshe would not bring them in. Maybe he would go in as a foot soldier, but he won't be the leader anymore. So Korach felt that Moshe's position at the top of the pyramid was not going to last anyway, only 11 days. But once the Chet HaMeraglim took place, and the 11 days has now become 40 years, so that's why Korach mounted his power play at this point, which he didn't feel the need to do if it was only a matter of days before Moshe is either dies or is deposed, or Hashem says to Moshe, time to step down. Remember, I told you that already in Mitzrayim. Then he has another suggestion as well, which is a bit more subtle, but I like it. It's along broadly similar lines. Korach had great yichus. The Torah draws attention to it. We just looked at that passage. V'kach Korach, the son of Yitzhar, the son of Kahas, the son of Levi. So Korach was a person of great pedigree, distinguished for high birth. He was from the tribe of Levi. Not only that, but he was from the sub-tribe of Kahas. Kahas was of the three sons of Levi. Kahas was the most prestigious because the descendants of Kahas were the ones who
I don't think there's enough farin in the
Aron,
recipe.
the Ark, and the Menorah, and the Shulchan HaZahav, and the Mizbeach. In other words, Korach, in that sense, was a very, as I said, in a prestigious position. Problem is, like a lot of exalted position, there's a certain concept of noblesse oblige, which I'm sure I've mispronounced, that there is a responsibility that goes with all of that prominence. So in order to be the one to carry the Ark of the Covenant, which Korach was, according to the Medrash, he was among the Nosei Haron, but one has to maintain a high level of Kedusha, of sanctity, in order to be in that role. It says that the ark would actually bring about the premature or the sudden death of those who carried it if they were unworthy. We find that later on. Excuse me. When the ark, in the days of David HaMelech, the ark was brought up to Yerushalayim, and I forget the name of the one who touched it. Someone can remind me, maybe I can't remember his name. And he met a sudden death. So it's maybe reasonable or it's natural to recognize that just as Nadav and Avihu, who approached too closely when they weren't worthy and they met their death, in a similar way, this was the quality of the Ara, which means that it's only for the elite, but you've got to maintain your stature. It requires a high level of sanctity, of purity of thought, purity of behavior. And therefore, Korach thought, you know what, this is not for me. I would rather be the king, or I would rather be the Kohen Gadol. Then I don't have to carry the ark. And I have even more prestige, and it doesn't bring with it that particular danger, which I don't really like. However, if again, according to the original plan, that it was only 11 days' journey, this role of carrying the ark, although we don't often think of it this way, it became a kind of lifetime duty only after the decree of the 40 years of wandering, according again to the original plan. After they built the Mishkan, they set out to journey from Choreh, from Har Sinai, towards the land of Israel, a journey, like we said earlier, of 11 days. Once they get to Eretz Yisrael, he doesn't have to schlep it around anymore. They will establish a location for the Mishkan, which is exactly what happened, in fact. They had a few temporary locations, but nevertheless, they weren't carrying it around, every few weeks or even every few years. It was centuries. Eventually, it had its permanent place, of course, in Yerushalayim, but then Mishkan Shiloh and other places. The point is that this uncomfortable position for Korach, because he wasn't really exactly worthy, or at least it didn't suit him, that kind of responsibility. So he could put up with it for a few days, but now he's facing 40 years of it. So therefore, he decided now is the time to launch his power play, because the responsibility of carrying the Aron with everything that goes with it was weighing heavily upon him. Excuse me, no pun intended, because the ark itself would float. In fact, the ones who carried it were carried by the ark, perhaps metaphorically, but the actual physical effort of transporting it was slight. It was the spiritual greatness that was the responsibility. So according to Yonatan and Eibeschutz, this is why he launched his campaign now. It wasn't so much, he doesn't even say at all what I mentioned, according to the simple understanding that Moshe's prestige was at a low ebb, so this was his opportunity, but rather, from what Yonatan and Eibeschutz says, it was because initially he thought that Moshe was not going to enter the land in any case, which they're all going to do, but now the 40 years is in. Okay, let's go on to another aspect of it, which I find very interesting. So I'm sharing it with you. Vaikach Korach. So I said already in our very rushed introduction, I read this passage very quickly, but I made the observation, which I'm sure you know, that the Torah doesn't say what he took. Rashi, many of the Mefarshim take an interest in this kind of, it's, I don't know what the technical term grammatically is, but it's sort of dangling. Vaikach Korach, with his pedigree, he took. In fact, Rashi, one of the things Rashi mentions is that he took his shtar yuchsin, he took his family tree in order to demonstrate, or in order to substantiate his claim and to demonstrate his greatness. He took his family pedigree, and maybe that was part of his downfall. But in any case, it does not say clearly what he took. A number of different approaches are mentioned in the Mefarshim, as I mentioned just now. Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz, the Medrash says, Lakach mekach ra la'atzmo. He took a defective acquisition. Vayikach is to take, but vayikach in classical Hebrew, we don't use it so much in modern Hebrew, but in classical Hebrew, in rabbinic Hebrew, and in biblical Hebrew, vayikach, to take, is to purchase as well, to acquire or to purchase. In Hebrew, modern Hebrew, we say liknot, to buy. But in classical Hebrew, vayikach is often an expression of acquiring something or purchasing something. So the Medrash says, Lakach mekach ra la'atzmo. He acquired for himself a purchase that was very bad. He acquired not just defective, but he acquired something which was bad. What did he acquire? So the Medrash says that Korach was a pikeach. He was very clever. He was very wealthy. In fact, in his day, says the Medrash, he was like the paradigm for extreme wealth. And he had great yichus, he had great pedigree, as we mentioned already, from Levi, from the most distinguished part of Levi. He was a cousin of Moshe Rabbeinu as well. You can't have greater yichus than that. So what prompted him with such a privileged position, with wisdom, with intellect, with wealth, with prestige, with high birth? what moved him, what motivated him to undertake this doomed insurrection. Mara lishtuseh. But it was exactly his high and mighty position. He was brimming with self-regard, with gava, with arrogance, and that is what prompted him to make this power play. He thought, because I'm so wealthy, because I'm so clever, because I've got such yichus, I'm hot stuff, I should have a much bigger piece of the action than I have. With all of the prestige that he had, he wanted a lot more. And that was his downfall. That's what he took for himself. Okay, that's what the Medrash says. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschutz adds something further, though. He says, uh, this mekach ra, this faulty, defective acquisition, the acquisition that he took for himself is that he is forever remembered for all posterity as a Baal Machlokes. He is the paradigm for Machlokes, for dispute, for dissent, for arrogance, for greed. When I say arrogance, arrogance, we've got other examples as well, but for jealousy, for the desire to supplant or replace someone else only out of a sense of jealousy and greed. He's the Baal Machlokes. He is the exemplar of a Baal Machlokes. So that's what it says, Vayikach Korach. Because of what he did in the verses that follow, Korach acquired for himself the ignominy, the eternal shame of being the personification, the paradigm of a Baal Machlokes, who bit the dust because of it, literally bit the dust, was swallowed up by the earth, as we know. So his renown became infamy. There are certain people in history, I'm talking about general world history, that we can compare, to whom we can compare Korach, at least in this regard, that they are remembered for shame and ignominy. I don't know how many fellow Americans we have here. Ruthie, we've got some fellow Americans. But Benedict Arnold, if you remember your American history, he's probably unknown in Britain, but in American history, he was an officer in George Washington's army fighting the British, and he defected to the British. And he led the British in fighting against the men whom he had commanded only a year or so previously. This is Benedict Arnold, and he remains to this day a kind of watchword for the turncoat, for the traitor. Of course, in British history, we've got Guy Fawkes. I don't think Guy Fawkes ever amounted to anything very special, but his name lives on in infamy, of course, because of the gunpowder plot. So these people are remembered for their villainy, and Korach would have been the same. I just want to add a little bit more, and then I have a final thought on this particular subject, that, of course, the urging and the teaching of hazal is just the opposite. Not to seek aggrandizement, prestige, power, renown, fame, but rather snas harabonos, living means to hate authority, to hate a position of authority. To flee from honor, not to pursue it, not to crave it, not to be almost dependent on honor, but just the opposite, to avoid it. Like Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, the founder of the Mussar movement, who wanted nothing more than to be anonymous. He wanted to avoid the public eye. But ultimately, he realized that in order to advance his program of Mussar, he had no choice than to reveal his own greatness. Or his great Rebbe, Reb Zundel Salant, the Rebbe of Reb Yisrael Salanter. Reb Zundel Salant was a Talmud of Reb Chaim Volozhin, the leading Talmud, of course, as I'm sure you know, of the Vilna Gaon. He was also a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva Eger. We mentioned Rabbi Akiva Eger, I think in the Peter Shir, I remember correctly last week, maybe. Reb Zundel Salant was an outstanding Talmud Chacham of the highest order. He used to dress like a balagala, like a wagon driver. He would not wear even a rabbinic hat or rabbinic garb. If they called him to the Torah harav, he wouldn't get up. He wouldn't go because he's not harav in his own mind. Or Rav Moshe Feinstein, who was the greatest posek of his time. He was so humble. Rabbi Zev Leff told us he once called him when he was in Miami. Rabbi Leff was a rabbi in Miami. He once called to speak to Rabbi Bluth, who was at that time was the long time shamus of Rav Moshe. He said, an unfamiliar voice answered the phone. He said, may I speak to Rabbi Bluth? So he said, Rabbi Bluth is not here. This is Moshe Feinstein. Maybe I can help. This is the kind of simplicity, or the great Rabbi Simcha Wasserman, whom Ruthie and I, especially Ruthie, knew very well. Simcha Wasserman, with all of his greatness, and he always wore a short jacket, and he never wore a bekish. As far as I know, he never owned a bekish. You know, every younger man, wears a langa rekel in certain circles. Rav Simcha Wasserman did not. We could go on, but my point is that the paradigm of greatness is to flee from honor, the humility. But Korach, of course, was just the opposite, and that's what he acquired. just to finish up what Rabbi Yonatan says, then I've got a further comment of my own reflection on this. He goes on to quote a legend of Augustus Caesar, the son of Julius. He was really the adopted son of Julius Caesar. He was really the nephew of Julius Caesar, but he was the adopted son and the successor of Julius Caesar. And he relates a legend that when the great men of Rome, the Senate, presented him with the crown to make him the emperor, he put the crown on the ground, and he basically said that this crown is brings with it a heavy, weighty responsibility. He said if people knew what the crown represented, they wouldn't even pick it up if it was lying in a dustbin for free, because of the duty, the responsibility, the weight of this crown. Anyway, it was that humility which meant that he was popular and he ruled for a long time. That's what Rabbi Eibeschutz says, quoting this legend. I would just like to add that in some cases, there are people who would rather live on in infamy than be forgotten. Some people that have that, they crave recognition, or they want their name to be remembered, that even if they're remembered for infamy, we find that in some cases with some of these terrible mass murderers, who may be completely deranged as well, but they're prepared to be a watchword for villainy as long as they're not forgotten at all. And maybe Korach had a bit of that. After all, if Korach had not mounted this insurrection, would any of us have heard of Korach? Probably not. The Torah probably would not have revealed his name to us altogether. So in an interesting way, perhaps Korach almost anticipated that his power play would end in catastrophe for himself, and yet he has achieved that renown, albeit infamy. And now the designation of Baal Machlokes, anyone who is a Baal Machlokes, is called Korach. A certain town in America, was in yeshiva there, and for certain reasons, some people wanted to start their own school, and somebody said, come to Korach's school. This is going to be the school of Korach. So Korach is a watchword for this form of villainy. But some people, they are prepared, or they would even prefer that to being forgotten altogether. It's interesting to contemplate. Anyway, that's what he says about Lakach Mekach Rala Atzmo. He acquired for himself the eternal ignominy of the Baal Machlokes. We have just 2-3 minutes left. I want to finally share with you something of a slightly Kabbalistic nature. Turn forward a few psukim to Pasuk Chaf 22. Chapter 16:22. Moshe and Aaron fell on their faces, and they said to Hashem, God of all spirits, l'chol basar, of all flesh. If one person sins, will you be angry at everyone? In other words, they were praying that Hashem should not destroy or punish all of the Jewish people, it was mainly Korach who was the insurgent here. So Korach has gotten what he deserves, but don't punish the rest of the generation. So he finds in this expression Elohei haruchos l'chol basar, a remez to the doctrine of reincarnation. And he says, Rabbi Eibeschutz says that Cain, according to the Kabbalistic tradition, Korach was a Gilgul of Cain. Korach was a reincarnation of Cain. Remember Cain and Abel from the first generation of mankind? So, of course, the name Cain is associated with the word kin'ah, jealousy. And Cain was jealous of Hevel, and he killed him as a result, the first homicide, the first fratricide. But Korach had a similar impulse, the similar jealousy. He was motivated by insatiable jealousy. Korach, according to this Kabbalistic tradition, was a reincarnation of Cain. Moshe was a Gilgul of Hevel. This I saw already many years ago in Rabbeinu Bechaya, when it says, "Moshe haya ro'es tzon Yisro," that Moshe was the shepherd for the flock of his father-in-law. Haya ro'eh, he was a shepherd. It says Rabbeinu Bechaya there in the beginning of Shmos, that this is a remez to Hevel, because Hevel was the original shepherd. Moshe was also a shepherd because he had previously been a shepherd, because Hevel came out. Of course, Hevel died at a young age. I mean, he died prematurely. Hevel was killed. He had no children, no progeny. Moshe was a reincarnation of Hevel, and Korach, the Gilgul of Cain. And that's why it says that Al Tefin El Minchasam, do not turn to their offering. That's what Hashem said regarding the attempt of Korach to mount his insurrection. Moshe said to Hashem, don't accept, don't turn to their offering. This evokes what the pasuk says, Ve'el Cain ve'el minchaso lo sha'a. But God did not accept the offering of Cain. So this suggests this commonality. There's a kind of, like I say, an echo or a reincarnation of Cain in Korach. He adds on one last thought to this idea, though, which is, I think, a very important insight. He says, Ki kashe la'adam l'taken nishmaso megilgul rishon. It's difficult for a person to rectify his sin from a previous incarnation. So because Cain was jealous the first time around, and because he killed Hevel, he sought to depose Hevel the first time around, Korach has a similar impulse, a similar inclination. He says it's difficult for a person to overcome a quality or a hate or a weakness which is inherent in his soul from a previous Gilgul. My friends, I think that is the whole point of Gilgul. I'm not disagreeing with what he says, but on the contrary, he is revealing a very important insight. The whole purpose of reincarnation, for those who subscribe to that whole doctrine, we can say that for another time, is to rectify, to perfect the failing of a previous incarnation. So Cain was prone to jealousy, and he came back as Korach, and he had the same problem. So, my friends, how do we know? How can we know? How can I know what is my purpose in being in this world? What failing in my soul needs to be rectified? And the best way to answer that question is whatever I find difficult, whatever I find challenging, whatever weakness I'm grappling with, whatever aspect of my avodas Hashem is most defective, it may well be that is the shortcoming that I am in this world to rectify. Because my soul needs exactly that. And that's why Korach, who of course I would not say that he passed the test, he failed the test, but this is the challenge that any person may well face. So a person's awareness, machavaso ba'olamo, what is his responsibility in this world in terms of the transmigration of the soul. It's to improve, to correct, to rectify that failing, which may have meant that the soul left this world the last time in an imperfect state. And each of us is faced with a challenge to do what we can to improve, and that which represents our maybe most evident weakness, that may well be the area that requires our attention this time around. So just to review, as we like to quickly, so we asked, why did Korach mount his insurrection just right now? So Rabbi Yonatan should suggest it's because Korach was aware that Moshe would not remain at the top once they entered the land of Israel. He thought that's going to happen in a few days, so he doesn't need the insurrection. But once they're condemned to die for 40 years, he's got 40 more years of Moshe's leadership. Similarly, Korach was carrying the ark, which he found onerous, because if he's not holy and pure, then he's not worthy, and he could die as a result. He thought it's only a few more days. Once we get to the land of Israel, we'll put it down and it'll be there permanently. But now he realized he's facing 40 years of this challenge. He thought, now's the time for my power play. The other two components of our shiur, we said, he took a defective acquisition for himself, which is the name. He acquired the name, that is to say, became the paradigm of the Baal Machlokes. He now lives, or does not live, but his name, we could say, lives in eternal ignominy as the paradigm for the Baal Machlokes. That's what Korach acquired for himself. And lastly, just now we said that Korach was a Gilgul, he was a reincarnation of Cain, and Moshe said that he will struggle to, Moshe recognized that it's difficult for Korach to overcome that, because he's put in this world for that purpose, and indeed he faces that challenge. And each of us in our own way, perhaps the same can be said for us also. Thank you for listening, and I wish everyone Shabbat Shalom. Should be a wonderful Shabbos, a peaceful Shabbos, a Shabbos where we all take to heart the lesson, the lesson of Machlokes and its consequences. Thank you very much. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Shkach.
Good job, Liz.
Shabbat Shalom. Thanks.
Rabbi Simon, I have a question. Is machloket always a bad thing?
Probably not, as the Mishnah says. There's such a thing as machlokas l'shem shamayim. But
isn't it the intention that counts? So if
yeah, absolutely. Yes, but it's very often the case, not always, but it's very often the case that a person whose intentions are not entirely pure cloaks himself in the guise of a machlokas l'shem shamayim. I mean, Rashi says already in in his commentary on the very beginning of the Torah that the second day was a day that introduced division. The first day, one is indivisible, but two is already division. And the introduction of division into the world is something which is dangerous. So, I mean, obviously, there's no reproduction with only one, etc. You need two for a lot of useful things. But machlokes is prone to trouble. But you're quite right that the Mishnah says there's such a thing as machlokes l'shem shamayim. Maybe we'll have to say that for a different time. But you're right. As I said, though, the temptation to claim it's machlokes l'shem shamayim when really there's a lot of self-interest, unfortunately, is a great lure, great temptation.